Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Captain Richard Sims. Richard is a longtime local broadcast journalist who is better known as an outdoorsman, fisherman, hunter, outdoor writer, and owner of Scenic City Fishing Charters. Richard, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we talk about your career path from game warden to broadcast journalist back to the outdoor industry, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Just regular old Maxwell House.
Pretty simple?
Yeah, and a spoonful of sugar.
Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
I just, one of my buddies that taught me how to drink coffee when I was a teenager still going duck hunting, and he always had a thermos full of coffee that, he got me tuned into because it was so cold and I was desperate for anything warm, and that's the way he drank it, black with a little bit of sugar.
How many you do a morning?
Two normally, yeah.
And duck hunting's such a cold, I call it sport or hobby or.
Yeah. You want something warm when you're out there.
Yeah, cold, it's wet,
it's very
helpful.
Dark. Yeah. And a lot of times it doesn't matter, what's in it. If it's warm, you want it.
Well, I really appreciate you being here, and you've got a fascinating career. And I frankly didn't know the extent of your outdoor activity and how deep it was ingrained in you. I knew it was deeply ingrained in you by your father, but I worked with you for 15 years, or close to that, 10 years at News Channel 9.
My retention of time frames is terrible. I couldn't remember how long you were there and we worked together.
Yeah, well, I came in 2004 and you left in 12?
14.
14. Okay, 10 years.
I can't believe it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, golly.
Yeah. So obviously found out over our years of working together your love of the outdoors. But I really wanted to start, as I said at the beginning, you grew up here in Chattanooga, right?
I grew up in Chattanooga. I knew from the time I was a teenager that I wanted my life to be involved in the outdoors and conservation in some form or fashion. And so from the very time I was a teenager, I knew that was going to be my career track, was to move in that direction.
Well, and from what I've seen in discussions with you, but particularly what you post on social media, your parents were really into the outdoors. Your mom and dad really seemed to have an influence on you in terms of what you wanted to do.
Extremely. You hear a lot of people say, I wish I'd been born 100 years ago. My father wished that he'd been born an American Indian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had a fascination with American Indians and archery. That was his life outside of work. He was a very creative person. He was advertising manager for the Miller Brothers department store. But when he wasn't at work, he was somewhere with a bow and arrow in his hand. And my mom was the same thing. They were organizers of the Tennessee Archery Association, and Dad was on the board of the directors of the National Field Archery Association. And
where did they get bit with that bug? I mean, why archery?
I have no idea, and I talked to my grandmother about it, and she had no idea how my dad, got interested in that. I really
nothing
don't
in
know,
his youth or family history that.
No, not really. My grandfather wasn't a hunter, I really have no idea where he became fascinated with that.
That's interesting because I've got a nephew who's become a big hunter and outdoorsman who my family, my dad was roughing it was poor room service, and we have no idea where my nephew Patrick got this love to be outside, but much like you, that's what he wants to do.
And somehow or another, when you get bit by the bug, then it never goes away.
So as a kid growing up, first, how many siblings?
I had one older sister who's passed now.
Okay.
And that was it.
But as a kid growing up and your parents so into this, what would a typical summer vacation look like then? Was it always taking you out camping and going somewhere like that?
I grew up on Chickamauga Lake. This was back in the days when companies, every major company in Chattanooga owned property on Chickamauga Lake that was strictly for employees. It was an employee perk, The company owned property. Miller Brothers owned property. It was just south of Sequoia Nuclear Plant. And literally every weekend, every summer, we were at the lake. We lived there. We stayed there. Ironically, of course, all the companies ended up selling this valuable lakefront property. Ironically, a very good friend of mine now owns a house and lives on that property.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
I was up there just 2 weeks ago, and and I'm sitting there telling stories about, here's this happened right down here, and so it's pretty cool. I still get to go back there every now and then.
Yeah, but you grew up going to the lake. You didn't grow up on the lake in terms of where you lived. You grew up in Brainerd?
Correct. We lived on Brainerd Golf Course.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. My backyard bordered hole number 12 at that time. It's now hole number 3. They reversed the 9s. I don't know why.
I know the hole.
Yeah, and I lived just about a drive away from the tee on hole number 3 on Brainerd Golf Course.
And you went to Brainerd High School at really a volatile time too.
It was the early 70s when forced busing first came to Chattanooga. Of course, it'd been issue all across the Southeast for years, and that's when it came to Chattanooga. So, that's when they started the heavy integration of Brainerd High School, and it was an interesting time.
How as a high schooler would you deal with that?
I'm sure every individual had their own, feelings and responses to it. I was not involved in high school extracurricular activities. I was the kid that went to school and left.
So you were the 240 club.
Whatever that is. I had not, I had friends in high school, of course, but I wasn't involved in any high school activities. So, I just stayed away from the fray.
Yeah.
I went to my classes and went home, and there would be riots, and occasionally, they'd shut school down for 2 or 3 days or even a week, to let the tensions calm down. For me, it was just, oh, great, boy, I can go to the lake. I can go hunting or fishing. It was just more days out of the classroom for me. So,
and that's kind of what I was driving at, is that your way of not necessarily dealing with it, but you had all the outdoor stuff you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And just point of clarification, the 240 Club was the bell rang at 240, and the 240 Club was everyone that got the hell out of school.
That was me. That was me. Yeah. And 240 was about the right time, because in my latter years, I worked for Crystal Restaurant, and I was supposed to be at work at 3. So, I hit the door at 240 and was in the restaurant at 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock. So that was your first job?
My first real job, Crystal Restaurant. They did an announcement at school and said, Crystal's looking to hire people. And I filled out an application, and I didn't get a call from anybody. And again, the way things used to be, a friend of mine's father was a health inspector for the city. And he called me one day when I told him I hadn't heard from him. He said, Richard, do you really want to work? And I said, I really want to work. I want to make some money. And he said, okay. And 2 days later, I got a phone call from manager at one of the Crystal restaurants and brought me in for an interview. And he told me, he said, I'm calling you, don't you? And I won't use the name, but he said, it's called so-and-so gave us a call and said, we really needed to look at you.
The health inspector.
And, but I was there, I worked there for 3 years until I left college.
The one on Brainerd Road?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any interesting stories out of that as a high school kid, you said, this is crazy.
It was an interesting place to be in your formative years. The most memorable to me was Friday or Saturday nights. Sometimes I'd get on third shift, and third shift on Brainerd Road, all the bars. I can't remember all the names, but there were several bars, and at that time, I assume it's still that way.
Yeah.
The city mandated they had to close at 3 a.m. And at 3:15 a.m., the Crystal Restaurant filled up. And all they did was move the party from the bars to the Crystal Restaurant. So it was I won't say it was always fun because it was a lot of work, but there was some interesting overnights from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. at the Crystal Restaurant.
And what was a Crystal at that time? Like a dime or 15 cents?
I remember when I went to work, they had been a dime, and I think they just went up to 11 cents. And of course, all the customers complained, about them going up a penny, and all the employees complained because they had to do new math. A dime was easy to calculate, like 11 cents. Oh no. Okay.
Now I got carryovers.
Yeah.
So high school, you're at Brainerd, you're working at Crystal, but you're really spending your time as much as you can out on the lake or out hunting or doing something like that.
Yeah. And, when you're that age, then those rare times you work a double shift, work 16 hours at the restaurant, and then after your 16-hour shift, one of your buddies pick you up and you'd head for the lake. And didn't think twice about it.
Well, nice to be young.
Yeah, I know. And now I couldn't make it through a 6-hour shift.
Well, you only got to get through this podcast today. You're working your way through high school. It's time to go to college. You got a love of outdoors. Where are you going to go, and what are you going to do?
My goal was to work for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, the state agency responsible for all the wildlife and fisheries and boating safety in Tennessee. So Tennessee Tech was the only state school in Tennessee that had a 4-year wildlife management degree.
Is that still true today, or do you know?
No, it's not true anymore. Now, all of the UT schools, UT Chattanooga doesn't have a wildlife program, but of course UT Knoxville has a wildlife program, and UT Martin out in West Tennessee offer wildlife management and fisheries management, et cetera. They're the only ones I know of, but at that time it was just Tennessee Tech. So it was where I was going to go. No questions asked.
And you're headed up to Cookeville.
Yep, headed up to Cookeville. And that was more fun and more freedom than I should have had, apparently, because my first semester at that time we were on quarters. Yeah. After my first quarter, I was on academic probation, and
welcome to the club.
Quarter began in the fall hunting season.
Yeah.
So I was in the woods all the time. I think my first quarter I pulled a 0.8 GPA, and second quarter I pulled it up to a whopping 1.5. And
you almost
but
doubled
that was
it.
enough to get me off academic probation anyway. Yeah. And so the first 2 years, I was a very poor student. It was all mandatory requirements,
all your prerequisites, and that's
chemistry, math, all that stuff, and I was horrible at that. But then the final 2 years, junior and senior year, you got to start taking all your electives within the wildlife management program. And when the last 2 years, I kicked it.
And what kind of classes are in the wildlife management? I'm just curious as to what a class would be that's teaching you beyond the basics.
Be ichthyology, the science behind fish and different fish, physiology of different fish that live in different environments, the chemistry of the water and how that affects fish and fish growth, and that's where some of the chemistry became useful. Botany, one of our one of my assignments one year, the botany, the instructor broke us in groups of 4, said, come up here, one of you throw a dart at the map, and you threw a dart at the map, and he said, okay, in this quarter, your group's assignment is to identify every species of plant within a 1,000-yard radius of where your dot hit. And, of course, he knew them all. And we didn't even go to class. I think he'd have us come to class once a week just to check in on us. But our class was for the 4 of us to get together and head out in the woods and wander through the woods, identifying every single plant we could find.
You had to like that.
I did love it. It's one of the ones that's really memorable for me. Unfortunately, I don't retain it as well as I should, but I've retained a lot of it. And what I don't remember offhand, I know how to find it real quick. You know, I'm a pretty good Googler.
Well, and what I find interesting, you got this love of outdoors, and you're really immersed in it. But your junior year, you find out you need a minor. And that was a pretty big choice you made in terms of how it affected what you did a good portion of the rest of your life.
It was completely accidental choice. I mean, I actually had some interest in writing. I used to write stories about my hunting trips in high school. I'd come home and I'd write a story about a weekend hunting trip and stick it in the drawer somewhere. I was always interested in that aspect of it. But my minor that, I'd mentioned to you was I didn't know about it. Yeah. I had a really poor college advisor, and I didn't know I was required to have a minor degree, X number of hours in a secondary degree to your major. And I didn't find out until my junior year. And I was really upset. And I went to my advisor, and I was in kind of a perturbed state of mind and said, what's this about a minor? And he looks at me and he says, oh, we haven't done that for you? No, you haven't. And he pulled out my transcript, and I had 2 years of required English. So he said, well, we can take all your English credits and you can apply them to a minor in journalism. And I'm like, okay, that's what I'll do. So I started taking journalism classes along with my wildlife management classes, and I loved it. Yeah. I just loved it. I just thrived on it. It was fantastic.
Did that surprise you that you loved it?
I don't know. I mean, again, my father was a very creative person, a painter, a photographer, so I got a little bit of his creative genes, I felt like, and was able to put that to use. But one of my favorite memories about a journalism class was it was a radio class, and there were some people coming, magicians or something, that were going to do a campus program. And he said, I want you to interview these people, for our campus radio station. And I did the interview, similar to this podcast, with them, and went back, handed the tape to my instructor and said, okay, when are you going to air it? And he said, we'll air it, Tuesday, which was after their program.
Yeah, it made no sense.
That was my reaction. I'm like, that's crazy. Why are you going to do that? That's stupid. I mean, the whole point of the interview is trying to get people interested and come to the program. That's crazy.
And you don't want to tell them it just happened and you missed it.
And, at the end of the course, I can't remember. I got an A or a B. I don't even remember which one. But he came to me after that time. He said, Richard, you know why I gave you that grade? And I said, no, I guess I did the work. And he says, that radio interview. He said, your interview wasn't all that great. He said, but the fact that you fought to make me put it on the air at the right time. Yeah. That's the reason I gave you probably a better grade than you deserved.
Oh, that's good to hear. So you graduate from Tennessee Tech. You've got your outdoor management degree. You've discovered a love of journalism. Where's that take you?
The journalism didn't really have a whole lot to do with my job search. My goal was to become a wildlife officer, what most people know as a game warden for the Tennessee Wildlife Agency. You were required to take a civil service exam. And me and all my buddies, we all took the exam, and I did real well, which really made my buddies mad because they were 4.0 people all the way. But they didn't have the life experience. And it was a test that geared a lot toward life experience.
Yeah.
And so they were so anyway, I ended up getting a job as a wildlife officer, and none of my friends did, but we're still friends anyway. So,
and where was that?
I was assigned to Marion County, lived in Jasper, and loved Jasper. My supervisor at one point in time told me I knew the other choice was going to Dyer County, which is on the Mississippi River.
Yep. And
my supervisor told me, he says, yeah, me and so-and-so, we flipped a coin to see who got you. And I looked at him, I says, so does that mean you won the coin toss or lost it? And he just smiled and walked away.
Well, I know Dyer County, and I can tell you whether he won or lost isn't important. You won.
Well, I'm not so sure because I love to duck hunt.
Yeah, that's true. There's duck hunting in
that's what there is to do in Dyer County.
Yeah, that's true.
But my wife was very happy that we ended up in Marion County because, of course, all our family was in Chattanooga still. So yeah.
What does a game warden do? I know everyone's got the image of walking the trails or checking the lakes, and you're checking fishing licenses and things like that, but it's a lot more than that, right?
Well, it's a lot of that, but I mean, there's a lot of freedom. Wildlife officers have to be self-motivated, I mean, there's no way standing there looking over your shoulder every day and saying, here's what you have to do today. You decided what needed to be done. And a lot of it was law enforcement, routine patrol, just riding the back roads or getting in your boat and riding the lake, and just routine patrol, looking and watching for people. But there were other aspects, education, we're very involved in the hunter education program that youngsters are required to take nowadays before they can get a hunting and fishing license. And we had to coordinate and teach those kind of classes. And, it wasn't required or expected, but there's a lot of public relations aspects, going and speaking to civic clubs and groups and schools, et cetera, and interfacing with your local newspapers. And at that time in Marion County, there was the Jasper Journal and there was the South Pittsburgh Hustler.
I love that name.
Yeah, I know, me too. And, we went and met with the editors and told them I had a partner who also signed to Marion County and said, hey, we'd like to provide you with, your weekly outdoors column about hunting, fishing news in the outdoors.
Was that y'all's idea, or did the TWRA suggest that?
It was probably suggested because our predecessor, who moved on to another place and whose place we took, told us, hey, I've been doing this the whole time I've been here, so it'd be a good idea for you to carry it on. And the Nashville office headquarters did weekly news releases.
Right.
So you could just take the weekly news release and hand it to the newspaper and let that be it, and which is what a lot of wildlife officers did, but not me.
But you had a love of writing it.
Yeah. So I wrote, a lot of the columns, and I'd include the information coming out in the weekly news releases, but I'd dress them up a lot as well.
Yeah. Weaved more of a story than just a pure press release.
Right. Yeah. A lot of my friends got their picture in the paper. They bragged about, hey, my picture's in South Pittsburgh Hustler.
Was it a weekly column?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because I was really interested in that and showed an interest, at some point in time, the folks in the Nashville headquarters, got wind of it and started looking at my stuff. And one of the guys, the head of they called it information and education, but it's the head of their PR department, called me one day and said, hey, Richard, I'd like to come down and ride around with you one day, maybe shoot some pictures, and which they're always needing that. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So he came down and we rode around on routine patrol one day and did all the stuff I normally do. And, but it was an interview. I didn't
Yeah,
know
you
it
didn't
at the
realize
time, but it was an interview, and a week or two later, he called and offered me a job in Nashville, which was, it's kind of hard because we really loved being in Marion County. My wife, Barbara, taught at Marion County High School. But anyway, we made the move.
So did that take you out of the field and into a desk job in Nashville?
I was the photographer. I was the assigned photographer for the State Wildlife Resources Agency. So if anything needed to be photographed, whether it be official events or illustrations for news releases or illustrations for our magazine, we had a monthly magazine at that time called Tennessee Wildlife. It was my job. I had photography for it. So it was literally the best job in the world because I had a budget. And I could just go to my boss and say, hey, we need some pictures of bears. So I'm going to the Smokies for 3 days. And I'd go to the Smokies for 3 days and look for bears. And next week I'd say, hey, we need pictures of eagles at Reelfoot Lake. So I'd
go to Reelfoot.
I'd go to Reelfoot Lake for 3 days. So I just traveled the state from one end to the other.
How old were you at this time?
At that time, you're going to make me do math. 80,
well, it's not 11 cents or 10 cents.
I was 26, 28, in that range. Yeah.
What a great way to start your career doing what you're passionate about.
Like I say, it was a dream job. It was fantastic. And I moved around, had a couple of different titles and assignments, but always within the information education division. And at one point in time, that's when video was catching on really big, and they came to me, and I always remember the amount. They say, here's $100,000. We want you to create a video production.
And you're still a pretty young guy, and they're giving you, and $100,000 is still a lot of money today.
Yeah, and I went out and bought a 3/4-inch edit bay and video camera and all the assorted tools that went with it.
Did you teach yourself?
They sent me the only formal training I had. There were no video schools at that time, but they sent me to Eastman Kodak in New York for 2 weeks to a film editing school, learning the basics of editing film. Yeah. But the principles of editing all applied to video as well. And that was the only formal training I had. Other than that, it was just go out and do it.
What a challenge.
Yeah, but I loved it. I mean, from day one, I instantly recognized the power of video. Yeah. The ability is just like the transition from film cameras to digital cameras, the instant gratification of going out and shooting video and having fantastic images of wildlife and people hunting and fishing and, being able to use that to tell a story.
Well, and you don't have to have it developed either. It's
right.
It's instantly
instant.
there.
It's there.
Yeah. How long did you do that?
I probably started the video production unit. I was in Nashville for, 4 to 5 years, something like that. And I probably did that about 3 years. Yeah.
And what drew you back to Chattanooga?
A daughter.
Well, that'll do it.
Barbara and I had our first daughter born in 1982. And Barbara and I in Chattanooga, both of us grew up within walking distance of our grandparents' homes. Yeah. Maybe not all of them, but, So, family meant a great deal to us. And as our daughter started getting older, and we'd take a weekend and we'd go visit my mother for a weekend. And I watched my daughter starting out being scared. Who is this stranger, that you're making hold me? Yeah, and it broke my heart. And we figured out pretty quick, as Priscilla got a little bit older, that we've got to get back close to family.
Yeah, that's
we
important.
Can't have this, just weekend excursions, run and gun. We got to get back to family. So that's when I decided we're going back to Chattanooga, and I knew I was going to have to give up the career, but that didn't matter.
It's a big decision because you got a good career going. You're in the outdoor industry. You're doing what you love. You're doing what you're passionate about. You're obviously entrusted to build this video division for TWRA. And you say, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but we're going back to Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much it. It was going to have to, there wasn't really, actually I probably could have come back here as a game warden.
Yeah.
If I wanted to. Could have just, kind of stepped back and said, hey, I want to be a game warden stationed in Hamilton County or in the near area. And I loved being a game warden. It was great, but I knew I didn't want to do it the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And because I'd become so enamored with video and video production and knew the power of it, I figured that was going to be the way to go for me. And I started knocking on the doors of all the TV stations and saying, hey, give me a job. I applied as a reporter and photographer, whichever way it would go. And finally got the call from Bill Wallace.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. And Bill Wallace, he had just been hired at Channel 9. And
Bill Wallace was the news director.
He was news director. And I was his very first hire as news director. I don't think he'd been news director but about a week when he hired me as a photographer, video photographer. And
did you have a portfolio of stuff to show him video-wise?
Yeah, I had a resume tape of my work with the Wildlife Resources Agency, and that I sent them. And I remember John Creel, the chief photographer, telling me later, in your resume tape, you really buried your lead. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, well, we made it through the first two. They'd be like video news releases we'd done, and we made it through your first 2 or 3. But man, I kept watching. I almost didn't, but I kept watching. But like that 3rd or 4th story you had buried on your resume tape was the one that got you hired.
Do you remember the story?
I don't exactly. I think it was a 30-second PSA, that we'd done, that we provided all the TV stations in the state.
Yeah.
But I do remember when Bill Wallace hired me, we did the interview and and he said, okay. He said, you're hired. We'd like for you to start such and such a date. I'm like, hey, fantastic. And he was kind of getting up, ready to leave. And I was like, I was about to uproot my entire life and my entire career. I'm kind of like, can I get something in writing? Other than just you telling me to show up such and such a day, can I get something in writing? And he kind of, oh, okay. And he grabbed a piece of paper and a magic marker, and he wrote on this piece of paper, please welcome Richard Sims, who will be our new news photographer starting such and such a date. And he walked out the office and he tacked it up on a bulletin board. And he says, is that good enough?
That's funny. Changed a little bit since then. But, to your point, you are uprooting your family. You're coming back. It would be nice to the other that you go home to Barbara and say, yeah, he hired me. Well, what do you got? I don't know. He just told me to show up.
I think at that time, I'm not sure there were even contracts for on-air personnel. But, and it was also, of course, during my time at Channel 9, I still had a love of writing. Mm-hmm. And I had the opportunity early on to be a freelance columnist for the then Chattanooga Times newspaper. A guy I knew who I'd worked with while I was at the Wildlife Agency called me. He was an attorney. And he said, hey, Richard, I'm just getting too busy. I can't do this column for the Chattanooga Times weekly. He says, would you like for me to recommend you for it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. So, they called me and said, yeah, we'd like for you to do our weekly column, so on and so forth. They read some stuff I'd written. And so I wrote my first column for it, and it popped up in Chattanooga Times. Boy, the next day, Bill Wallace called me in. He says, Richard, why didn't you tell me about this? And I'm like, well, Bill, I didn't really think it was any of your business. I mean, it's outside my work time. And he's like, well, this is kind of, you're working for competition. And I'm like, Bill, you want me to write a weekly column for you? Well, no, we don't really have a place for that. I'm like, there you go. So, no, it's not competition. He ended the conversation. I just wish you'd told me about it.
Yeah. and from my standpoint, I could see that.
In hindsight, sure, I can see it. Probably would have been a smart thing to do, but I was still pretty young, so I wasn't very
young
smart.
And someone's approached you, and you're getting a chance to do what you love, write about the outdoors. So you did that, and then the Times Free Press the Times ceased to exist and became part of the Times Free Press, and the column just went to that.
Well, yeah, it was kind of strange. It was a bad time. Of course, I did that until the Times went out of business in 1999, 2000, something like that. And no, I did not automatically go over to the Free Press because they had an outdoor columnist, an employee. He was a full-time outdoor writer. But I did start writing for John Wilson, the Chattanoogan.
Yeah, because John launched about 2002, maybe?
Well, yeah, almost immediately after Times went out, he started Chattanooga because he was, he was old school, and he believed firmly that every city needs to have competing newspapers.
And he's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he took me on as outdoor columnist. But then the Chattanooga Times Free Press, as their outdoor writer at the time, he was getting close to retirement, and he was getting a little more laid back and didn't want to do as much. And they said, why don't you do a piece for us, every 2 weeks? So I started doing that. And, of course, I talked to John about it first and said, I'm going to start doing a little bit for the Times Free Press, but I promise never the twain shall meet. Your content will be your content, and their content will be their content. I won't be duplicating stuff.
So during this entire time you're doing these columns and you're still in your outdoor passion, you're building a broadcast career. You're an integral part of the newsroom of, the number one television news department.
Yeah, it was a great place to be, especially at that time. Channel 9, was the 500-pound gorilla at that point in time. And, I got to do a little bit of everything. I did report a little bit occasionally. Ultimately, I wanted to advance my career, so I ultimately did move to the editorial side, off the street as a news photographer to becoming a show producer.
Mm-hmm. And at this time, you had a pretty good anchor team, huh?
Channel 9's still living off the reputation of Bob Johnson and Mary Ellen Locher. That time was epic. It was just epic. And the whole team, I still, on social media, talk to a lot of the reporters that I went to work with in 1985 that are still out there and have followed their careers, and we keep up with each other. And the team that existed at that point in time, the closeness and the camaraderie and the dedication to the craft was so powerful.
Well, and local TV news was different at that time than it is presented today. You weren't taking corporate fed packages and running them as local stories. And you had the resources you needed.
Yeah. There was no corporation. There was a corporation. Channel 9 was owned by a big company, but it was a company that was libertarian philosophy. And so their philosophy was every station takes care of yourself first. And, so it was. It was all local all the time. I think at one point in time we had 9 news photographers, which is huge for what's considered a middle market.
Yeah.
And a massive team of reporters, and every reporter had ample experience already in other markets before they came to Chattanooga. So this wasn't their...
Yeah, it's a starter market today.
Yeah.
And it's just the way the business has evolved. Even Nashville will hire someone out of school at this point, because staffing is so difficult. Take me through your career arc at News Channel 9. you start as a photographer, but you work your way through news management.
Yeah, I was news photographer, and then I was chief photographer when we got a satellite truck, and John Creel became the satellite truck operator. I became chief photographer. And then they wanted to move me up, and they called me news operations manager. It was kind of a weird title with not a clearly defined responsibilities.
Well, the beauty of that is management can come to you and say, Richard, we need to do this. And you would find a way to get it done.
Yeah. And then, I don't know, after a couple of years doing that, I moved to being a show producer. I think I was the 5 o'clock news producer, and kind of went through the realm there to the point of I was promoted to executive producer. I did some time on the assignment desk, of course, as everybody does, and then executive producer. And that was another very difficult position for me because it's not clearly defined.
Kind of a catch-all, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so the news director, he can deal with sales and general managers and not worry about the newsroom as much.
Yeah. You're going to bring any fires to him.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at that job because it was so not clearly defined. And, I just had a hard time getting my arms around it.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first to say, anybody listening that was there when I was executive producer, I apologize.
Well, I don't think you need to apologize. But one of the positions you hadn't touched on yet that I'd like to know more about is when you moved into the internet.
Well, and that came after the executive producer. That's when the internet was, and
we were trying to figure out what the heck to do with it.
Yeah, I couldn't spell computer, but one of the news directors at that time, Jim Church, he was incredible technical guy, super computer geek. And I just started getting Jim to show me everything he could regarding computers. And then the time came, we'd grown to the point that we had to start getting our product out on the internet. Mm-hmm. And I gravitated toward that. And so they moved me into that was my responsibility. People ask me all the time, what do you do at Channel 9 News? And I'm like, everybody at Channel 9's job is to get news to you on TV, except for me. My job is to get the news to you on your computer or on your cell phone.
Yeah.
And it was difficult in the beginning because no one else really recognized the importance of it, and I was having to do an internal sales pitch, Well,
you had a culture change too, because the culture in a newsroom is we're not showing our hand. We're holding this for the 6 or we're holding this for the 5. If Channel 3 hears about this, we're not going to have it exclusive. And the fear was we put it on the internet, everyone's going to know, and it's going to give them a leg up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So it was a huge transitional process of when we'd hear about something and I'd be told, no, you can't put that on the web yet. We're the only ones that got this. Now, there was a lot of stuff that everybody was on, so it was no problem. Put it out there. We know everybody else already knows about this. But, yeah, there were times when I'd want to put stuff on the internet, and I'd be told, no, we need to sit on this until 5 o'clock at least.
Yeah. Well, and what I find interesting about all this is my main interaction with you is from that news aspect. I knew you had a passion for outdoors, but I didn't really understand how much that drove you, what that passion was. And you said something when I was doing some background with you, the aquarium and the 21st century riverfront plan really spurred you when you said, you know what, instead of showing people the river, let's get them out on the river. Mm-hmm. And you started your fishing charter business in 2006.
I give a lot of credit to my Scenic City fishing charters to Bob Corker. He was not the only one involved, of course, but he was the major player, the impetus behind our riverfront development. Yep. And that, of course, was just the icing on the cake to the aquarium.
Yeah.
and the aquarium had already started the process.
But he recognized the need to keep improving. We had the aquarium and everyone was kind of like, oh, this is great. We did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we got more to do.
We can't stop there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just as you said, I'd always fished, and I just saw this riverfront in Chattanooga gravitating to the river. And I'm like, there's a niche there. There's got to be a place for me to get people off the riverbank and on the river and out there enjoying our natural resources firsthand.
So you started this as a weekend gig.
Yeah, I got the idea in 2005 through my digital experience with Channel 9. I'd learned a lot about internet and web page development and all that kind of stuff, and spent a large part of 2005 creating my web page, and premiered it in January 1, 2006, and sat back and waited for the phone to ring. And it didn't take long, the phone started ringing pretty soon.
Pretty much an instant success.
Yeah. And no, there was growing time, but throughout 2006, I mean, it was midsummer 2006. I'm like, this is going to work. I mean, it's going to work to the point that it was an adjustment for Barbara, that I worked 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at Channel 9 News. And then every Saturday and Sunday, I was on the river guiding clients. And so it was an adjustment for my family as well, because I was a lot of times working 7 days a week.
How many years did you do the 7-day-a-week gig without really?
I started in 2006 and quit Channel 9 News in 2014. So I did it from 2006 to 2014. That's 8 years.
That's a labor of love.
Yeah. And then when I left Channel 9, I was able to go full time, and I was guiding 4 and 5 days a week.
What drove that decision that you finally said, I'm going to go full time? Because if you're having that success, why didn't you go earlier? Or was it just that?
My intention was to leave Channel 9 when I turned 55 in 2009. That was my intention. And then that time came, and I sat and I thought, I'm like, I love my job.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Well, you were good at it too.
I wake up in the morning looking forward to going to Channel 9 and do my job because I love it so much. And I'm like, I'd be crazy to give that up.
Yeah.
That'd be stupid. And so I continued. And then it was 2.5 years later when the other corporation came along. So it didn't take but about a year and a half for me to say, no, this isn't going to work.
But it's nice you had an alternative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if it hadn't been for that, I'd have been forced to
put up with it or figure out something else to do. So going full time and working for yourself, was that a big adjustment for you?
It was. It requires a lot of self-motivation. You've got to be dedicated. I could
like a Game
not
Warden.
have done it if it had not been for the fact that Barbara, my wife, was still teaching at the time.
Yeah.
So I could go on her health insurance. It would have been
That's a big deal.
impossible for me to do if it had not been for that. But I went on Barbara's health insurance, and so that monkey was off my back. I could just concentrate on the business and growing the business. And like I say, by that time it was going gangbusters. I don't know. I mean, at one point, of course, winter's always slow. People don't want to get out on the water at the winter time. Yeah. And, but I was typically doing 150 to 175 guide trips a year. Plus I was still freelance writing on the side in addition to that. So, it worked great. It was wonderful.
Talk a little bit about the guide service today. You grew it by basically working with other guides as freelancers, right? And rather than bringing on employees.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't by design. It just happened. I met a young man 12, 13 years ago. He's a teacher. He asked me if I'd take some of his students. He liked to reward his students at the end of the year, his high-performing students. And he called me and said, hey, will you take me and my kids fishing? He was going to pay me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll take you. I don't want your money. Yeah. And that's how he and I got to know each other. And he fished, and he loved to fish. And at one point in time, he said, hey, I'd like to do this. I'd like to guide, but I don't want to do all the background stuff. Can you set me up? And so I started booking guide trips for him. Then a couple of years later, somebody else came along and said, hey, I know you're booking fishing trips for Captain Simons. I'd like to do the same thing. Like, okay, you're in. And so it just kind of organically happened.
Yeah.
And now there are 9 other guides that I book trips for. And some of them depend upon me entirely for all their booking. Some of them have their own independent businesses and websites and the whole 9 yards, but they recognized the power of the Scenic City Fishing brand and the fact that I've been at it so long and pretty well known in the industry out there in the world. And, so they came to me and said, hey, I'm going to still do my own thing, but I'd like it if you would help me and throw other trips my way. And they all have their own little specialties and their own little schedules, so it wasn't really a conflict with the other guides so much. And so I started doing that. But so now we're up to, I still do a few guide trips, so there's actually 10 of us who guide.
If someone wants to get in touch with you about a trip, how do they get in touch with you?
Email, phone, or text. I do no paid advertising. It's all Google driven,
So just Google Scenic City Fishing and they'll find you.
Google fishing in Chattanooga.
And they'll find you.
Chattanooga Fishing Guides, yeah, you'll find me.
Well, SEO so well that you're probably risen to the top of the search.
I mean, I knew it reasonably well, and I knew it good enough, well enough. But if I had to go back and rebuild stuff now, no.
That's why we have AI.
Yeah, that's true.
I do want to hit on 2 more things before we finish up. One of them is explain noodling and why your daughters were so good at it.
Noodling, there's about 2 months of the year that when catfish spawn, making baby catfish, they find underground holes and cavities along the riverbank or lake shore to build their nest and lay eggs. That's what catfish do. And so during that time, and that time only, American Indians, by my understanding, discovered it first, that you can go along the lake shore and find holes in the riverbank, and you run your hand up in that hole, and you either feel a catfish or the catfish finds you by
clamping
eating
on
your hand. And I had friends who did that, and they were producing a video.
Yeah.
And they were up toward Knoxville, Watts Bar area. And the video he was producing, it was back during the Girls Gone Wild craze.
Yeah.
He was doing a video called Girls Gone Grabbling. And grabbling is another word for noodling. And so he was taking off on the Girls Gone Wild craze and doing Girls Gone Grabbling. So his video was 100% women who were out noodling for catfish. And my daughter was in UT Knoxville at the time. And I took her down and introduced her, and she met the guy's wife, and they really clicked. And so the entire summer he was filming that video, Priscilla was on about half of their trips.
Yeah.
And of course, she got her sister involved as well, who would come up and go on some of them. And the fact that she just did it so much, and she was good at it.
Well, you can still go on YouTube and see the videos.
Yeah, they're all over YouTube. If you go Google Girls Gone Grabbling, you're going to find it somewhere or another, and you're going to see Priscilla at some point in time. And
Well, tell Priscilla if she gets a spike out of this, I'm sorry.
But yeah, she and the others got a lot more than their 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
I do tell the story. Maxim magazine, because he was so successful at his Girls Gone Grabbling marketing, Maxim magazine picked up on it.
Did they really?
Yeah, and they put a little blurb in Maxim magazine, hey, new video on the market, Girls Gone Grabbling. And Priscilla and my daughter were on the cover. And I went into Channel 9 one day waving at Maxim magazine saying, hey, look, my daughters are in Maxim. And everybody's looking at me like, you're proud of that?
Well, you know what? You're a proud dad.
I was very proud of it.
Absolutely. All right, Richard, before I get to my last question, I need to remind listeners who makes all this possible. Thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. All right, here's the last question that I ask everyone. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Family.
Yeah, that's it. Huh?
That above all else.
I think you proved that.
Well, that's the reason I ended up doing just about everything I do since I was 25 or close to it. And it's the smartest decision I ever made in my life, along with my wife, of course, was devotion to family.
It seems it's worked out well for you.
Yeah, it spent yesterday afternoon with my daughter and my grandson just out riding around the lake on the boat, taking little Charlie out on the boat and exploring. And
I thought you had a little wider, extra smile this morning than I'm used to. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's great to catch up with you.
Well, thank you. It's great. Not very often I just get to sit and talk about myself.
Well, you got a fascinating story.
Well, I've been lucky to live a very eclectic and diverse life, and most of it just happened by accident more than anything else, but it's been good.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.